Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the April 26th Grants Pass City Council Workshop. Councilor Fazer is with us via Teams or by phone this morning, and everyone else is present. First up on our agenda, Destination Marketing Organization discussion, and are we starting with who? Doug?
Doug is going to be introducing this.
All right, Doug Bradley with the DMO is here to present.
Well, thank all of you once again, Mayor, councilors, for the opportunity to present again before you in regards to the future of the DMO that we're building. I was able to get some information into your hands, and the first thing I'd like to do is make sure that you are looking at the draft budget and then the comparison budgets of the other DMOs. But before we get into that, I'd like to take an opportunity to make some points that the council may find valuable in making their decisions moving forward. One of the first points is we've been working on this for 2 years to get to where we are right now. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remind the council that the Starter Board is working on behalf of the city and doing the job that was assigned or was the expectation of the city for us to follow through on. So we're doing the work that we've kind of been tasked to do, not just by the city, but the council as well. And funding is often a problem with a lot of different projects and programs that we have. We've had a DMO that has been dormant for a little while now. So we do have surplus funds. Those funds could be used to start up the DMO. In addition to the fact, we do have the opportunity to fund a DMO to ensure the highest level of success for that program. And that's really what I think the Starter Board is looking for, is just to make sure that as a council, you understand that we really want to back up an executive director and give them the best opportunities for success down the road. That's how we're all going to benefit from the program. The second thing is we have enough oversight to where if things aren't going the way that we would prefer them to go, we do have our oversight of a full board of directors that would be monitoring the success of the executive director, as well as the council and city having their areas of oversight as well. And we are in support of oversight and making sure that everybody on that level feels kind of comfortable with how we're moving forward. And I feel in the past we've had 100% buy-in from everybody just to be able to develop a destination marketing organization that is not only competitive, but may at one point set the standard for what DMOs in the state of Oregon are doing. And that's really what the goal of, I think, this Starter Board and then ultimately the board will be. And right now, I think the greatest success to the success of the program would be our failure to get 100% buy-in from the people that are in this room right now. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve today. So with that, I'd entertain questions. We've got some information in front of you. One of the things that we wanted to do is give you some comparisons of how other DMOs are funded. And we've got some that are funded less than us and some that are funded to a higher value. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys, we're not asking for the moon, but we also don't want to be, at the bottom of the barrel. I think what we're asking for is reasonable, and that's why I wanted to give you the kind of both ends of that spectrum.
Doug, I don't think we have anything in front of us right now. Are you referencing the items that were emailed on Friday?
Mm-hmm.
We can get those printed out right now and bring them down to the dais.
I would always like those in front of us if they're emailed to us on Friday. It's helpful during the meeting. Thank you.
Well, we'll give that a couple of minutes, but what we did provide you with is a draft budget of similar to what you could expect from any destination marketing organization, as well as some comparisons in funding. In addition to that,
Mayor, I don't want to interrupt, but if it would be beneficial for you to be able to see that in front of you, maybe we want to put this one on hold and move on to another agenda item. We'll have those printed and on the dais for you, and then you can go through those as he's talking about the budget and stuff.
Would that be helpful for you, Doug?
Sure, yeah. Well, whatever's helpful for you. You know, I'm here to present to you guys, so.
Okay, I mean, we did have the opportunity to look over them, but I just don't feel that because we have asked for them to be emailed in advance, that that's a replacement for having the documents during the presentation. Council, would you like to skip to the next item for now? Brian?
Maybe we could move to the wildfire protection plan since the other two are kind of linked together.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt, Doug. Are we prepared to move forward with wildfire?
We didn't anticipate a change in schedule. I can have Lang Johnson en route if that's going to be necessary.
Okay. Let's just take a 10-minute recess. Thank you. Hang on just a minute. Oh, okay. We're back on. Sorry for the delay. We've had a little bit of change in schedule here. We are going to rearrange the agenda and have wildfire protection plan go first while we make copies of the presentation for the DMO. And then I also made a mistake earlier. I said we were all here, but actually Valerie Lovelace is absent today, and DJ is now on his way in, so he's no longer participating via Teams. So now we have Ling Johnson here to present on wildfire protection plan. Welcome, Ling.
Thank you and good morning. So we'll get started with community wildfire resiliency. And the relationship to council goals is to ensure community safety and then develop an urban interface wildfire resiliency plan, which I believe came out of your goal setting and was a 3-star. The objective is informational presentation on the Rogue Valley Integrated Fire Plan and the current activities to establish a context to understand the community wildfire resiliency so that we can have some good conversation about what the council might like to do for the future. So a little bit of background on the current wildfire situation. We're in extreme fire seasons. They're becoming the norm. Changing climate, so it's hotter and drier longer. Increased hazardous fuel loading. Increased development and urban density in our interface areas. And as we've seen some of the past fires, they're becoming urban-based fires as well. All landscapes are at risk at the same time, which means there's fewer resources. So it used to be that we'd have the valley floors would be at threat, and then as the season went on, the elevations would start to be added to the overall landscape. And we'd be able to time it and march our resources in accordance to where the threats were at. Now we're seeing that all the landscapes are under threat at the same time, which is really tapping into our ability to field enough resources to tackle the fires that we have to deal with. Challenges. We live in a wildfire environment. That's not going to change. We have a complex system of land ownership, so it's hard to determine who actually owns what fires. We're normalizing catastrophic fires now. We've been under siege for quite a while in the West, and we've noticed that several of these fires are wiping out large numbers of homes, and we're normalizing it. The tendency of apathy towards preparedness. So what we run into the fire service all the time with our prevention activities is this feeling that this happens to the other guy and that it's not going to happen to me. And that suppression and prevention of fires is both resource and time intensive and very expensive. The Rogue Valley Integrated Fire Plan, which really is a community wildfire protection plan, was developed following the 2002 Biscuit Fire. Big shout out goes to the planner at the time, Bruce Bartow, was the county planner. He saw the vision after the impacts of the Biscuit Fire on our economy and to homes and residences, or to our communities, about the need for coordination on a much larger scale on how fires are being fought and prevented. It became one of the most, it was the first comprehensive community wildfire protection plan in the nation and has been used as a model throughout the country. The mission of the plan is to reduce the risk of wildfire to life, property, and natural resources in the Rogue Valley by encouraging coordination among public agencies, community organizations, private owners, landowners, and the public to increase their awareness of and responsibility for fire issues. The goals of the plan are to create a living document that's multi-agency collaborative approach to dealing with the issue, to promote wildfire education, promote forest health using proven forest management techniques, to increase safety in wildland-urban interface, to encourage region-wide coordinated fire protection and suppression tactics and practices, promote region-wide coordinated emergency management and communications, and promote local economic opportunities. So under that mission, it really focuses on restoring and maintaining the landscapes the way they should be, creating fire-adapted communities, and developing wildfire response capabilities. The plan addresses the 2003 Healthy Forest Restoration Act, also known as HEFRA. It is a community wildfire protection plan, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. and it addresses the national cohesive wildfire strategy, which is to safely and effectively extinguish fire when needed, use fire where allowable, and manage our natural resources, and as a nation to live with fire, which is a big change in the strategy from decades past, which was to eliminate fire from our communities. We're understanding that that cannot be done. It's a two-county plan, so it was originally designed as a community wildfire protection plan for Josephine County, but as it began to evolve and we took the more regional approach, we pulled Jackson County into the effort. It supports state and federal partners' need for established coordination and collaboration, provides a framework for regional and local coordination. It meets pre-grant requirements for applicants, regional prioritization of limited funding, and it maintains essential relationships, partnerships, and coordination. So we really use this as the home plate, if you will, for all of the agencies who might have something to do with fire prevention or fire suppression, so that we're coordinating our efforts in a regional standpoint. So big picture, wildfire resiliency is achieved by becoming a fire adaptive community. So essentially the 30,000 foot elevation, think of this cohesive strategy as a national strategy to coordinate all facets of wildfire prevention, mitigation, and response. Wildfire resiliency is the regional objective to limit the impact of wildfire and speed recovery within a community. And then fire adaptive communities is the work that's done at the local level to adapt to wildfire environments. So that's actually going out, doing the fuels mitigation, putting defensible space around homes, development standards and requirements for subdivisions and homes, and all the other prevention activities that we would do. So what have we been doing? From a Grants Pass Josephine County Emergency Management standpoint, we have the Rogue Valley Emergency Management website, which is rvem.org. If you haven't been there, I encourage you to do so, because that's where you're going to find the entirety of the wildfire information that we use as a region. There's also a link to this plan at the top of the page when you open it. And then it also provides all hazard, all risk types of information for self-preparedness and regional mobilizations. We already mentioned it's a two-county plan. Between Josephine and Jackson County Emergency Management, they're working to hire a fire plan coordinator, which will pick up the plan and continue to move it forward, organizing and coordinating all of the activities amongst the partners. We hope to have that on board within the next couple of months. There's community alerting through Everbridge and Citizen Alert. And then there's emergency evacuation and shelter planning that we've been doing for years and will continue to evolve and develop. We're hoping in the next couple of months to roll out some new evacuation strategies based on the lessons we've been learning from Alameda and some other products that have recently come out. Just be like your ready, set, go programs and the levels of evacuation that I think we're all becoming familiar with now with our fire seasons. Provides an emergency operations center, and then funding for our ODF and our Grants Pass Firewise coordinator positions. As far as fire rescue goes, we've designated wildfire hazard areas. We have the Firewise coordinator. We have 9 Firewise communities either established or in the process of being recognized. We're heavily participating in the Dollar Mountain Fuels work. We have Wildfire Site Development Code, which the council's been working on. Enhanced suppression capacity, so that's our ability as structural wildland firefighters to not only do structural work, but to do wildland interface work. And then we participate in the complete and coordinated system of mutual aid. So we're part of the 2-county mutual aid agreement through the Rogue Valley Fire Chiefs. We participate in state mobilization, and we also have an outstanding relationship with ODF. So what are the 5 elements to building a fire adaptive community, which is really the steps that we move forward to building resiliency within our community? The first one is development. That's a comprehensive wildfire land use and planning, which the council is currently working on with our site standards. Community preparedness, awareness, education, accepting responsibility for self-resiliency and self-preparedness. So a lot of that work is what's currently happening through emergency management. Suppression, that's the enhanced capacity, capability, and relationships, building an interoperability and collaboration amongst all of the response partners. We do that very well in this region. Recovery, strategies and pre-planned processes for community infrastructure and economic recovery. And then fuels management, which is landscape level mitigation through reduction, maintenance, and deliberate stewardship. So those two are underlined and italicized because those are the two primary areas that we're really going to make a difference and put the biggest bang to the buck in terms of mitigation effort. Those are the areas that we need to focus on. So recovery is the ability to put people back in their homes quickly, the ability to put businesses back to work, and our citizens back to work. So it's our economic status. Fuels management is the landscape level work. Fire doesn't care who owns the land. Fire will continue to consume and to expand and to grow. So if you try to deal with landscape mitigation as individual property owners and or by ownership, then you get a checkerboard. And when you see fires to the degree and level that we saw in Alameda, those fires aren't driven by a fire front, they're driven by ember transport and strong winds. So you have to have across the entire landscape a mitigation effort to reduce those fuels. It's also the most costly and the most costly in terms of resources and expenses to get the work done. But more importantly, you have long-term investment in order to maintain it over the long term in order to make sure you don't waste the work or the energies. So in summary, we have a community wildfire protection plan. That's the integrated plan. We have done some good work. The path is there, and is a community choice to do more. The work and change necessary at the community level, landscape level is doable. We've proven that over the decades, that once we commit to actually doing the landscape work, we can get it done, and it does have an impact. It will take years of committed leadership and aggressive investment to make a difference. It's taken decades to get here. It'll take a few years of hard work to get to a point where these fires don't have quite the impact in our community that we're seeing now. Call to action is council discretion. Some alternatives: stay the current course with no immediate changes. Additional workshops to further explore options. Consider third-party consultation or some combination of all those above. And that is it for my presentation. I'm more than happy to address any questions and to expand discussion.
Thanks, Lang. I have a quick question about Everbridge, the communication alert, I guess citizen alert. Is that something that people need to register for, or is that community-wide automatic?
Well, our preference is they do register, because that way we get specific information regarding their needs, their location, and what they would like to be alerted by. But there is also options within that system for us to send a broadcast alert out to everybody either way. But if you do the registration, it makes it easier for us to do the target audience.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Lane. It's great to see that there's been a ton of stuff been worked on the last 2 decades. I have a question on this last slide when it says consider third-party consultation. So who is it that would be authority with enough experience to be able to go beyond what we've already done or scrutinize what we've done?
There are third-party companies out there that specialize in developing and enhancing existing community wildfire protection plans that will bring the best practices from across the country to play, and then we'll do something a little bit more in-depth in trying to find how to build collaborative relationships, find financing, and get to a more point-specific plan. That's stuff we can do in-house as well. Going to a third party outside is just another option to bring more information and maybe another way to do it.
I didn't see anything, when you talked about the big picture, I didn't see anything that really talked about any looking towards a fourth bridge or anything like that, because to me, for a big picture for this area, especially as we're considering denser and denser housing, fourth bridge to me should be a major part of this plan. I'm just wondering if anything that you guys do can lead us towards potential funding or making any recommendations at a higher level from this angle, from the fire protection angle on the fourth bridge.
And from my perspective, all of that is on the table, but it's going to take a much broader conversation, because it's not just whether you're doing it for wildfire evacuation routing, but you also have it for all hazard. So it could be flood, it could be earthquake, Could be part of our our regular response system. But that's getting a little bit, I think, more into the weeds in detail than what was intended as part of this over-encompassing conversation, but happy to go there and to look at that as well.
Do we have other questions for Lang? Joel?
Good presentation, Lang. I appreciate your professionalism and what you know and what you do, and have a lot of respect for that. So from a federal agency standpoint, evacuations really with an ICT team coming in managing a wildfire, it's outside the city limits but would require evacuation. Usually that's done through local authorities, the county and the city. Are we prepared to do that in an orderly and safe fashion?
So we have lots of experience. We have pretty well laid out plans for doing it, but there's always room for more. And I think there's more that we can do to be, we kind of take a gross overview for evacuation planning, generalized plans, generalized alerting, generalized processes for moving folks. But I think as these fires are increasing in their severity, and as we're starting to see from our lessons we learned over on the other side of the fence, is that we can do more to be more point specific to almost down to the neighborhood level. And so that's where our energies and focuses are now.
Do we feel do you feel like the agencies are adequately prepared to do so if we have to do it this summer?
Yes, we'll be able to move and evacuate and do the things we need to do. I always think we can do better.
Rick?
Thank you, Lang. You mentioned the Alameda fire, and I realized that that was an extreme condition there, and fuel reduction was a major factor that could have helped things. What were some of the other lessons learned from that fire?
I think the biggest lesson that we should learn from that fire is that these fires are becoming far more severe, they're far more aggressive, and there are a lot of different elements that are out of our immediate control during the response. If you want to limit the impact of these fires, then we have to start doing the investment ahead of time to do the fuels reduction and do the preparedness work and mitigate a lot of the energy that the fire can gain that allows it to grow exponentially and well beyond suppression resources capability to keep up with it or to put it down. That fire went out because the weather changed and the resources were able to catch up with it.
Vanessa?
Do we participate at this time in the deployment program, the Grants Pass Fire Rescue?
With the State Fire Marshal's office?
Yes.
Yes, we do in-state deployment. As part of, we jointly work with our other partner agencies within the Rogue Valley through the Rogue Valley Fire Chiefs. And as time and the resources allow, because of our small staffing, there are times that we don't necessarily send resources out, but for an in-state deployment where we're feeling comfortable that home base is taken care of, then we will add an engine and deploy them. We did this to quite a bit of an extent with the Slater fire, but that was a fire in our backyard, which made it easy. Plus, the entire state was strapped for resources, so not to have helped wasn't going to be a good thing either. It was really important for us to be out there and to support those efforts.
I know this is kind of off the cuff, but are you able to outline how those financial resources are used that's received from the state deployment program?
So we go out, we expend our resources, and then we'll submit for billing back to the state. The state will cover our costs, not only for hour for the firefighters who were deployed, including overtime, but their coverage as well. So if we call back firefighters to cover them, so we continue to provide services within the city. And then we will earn some dollars for equipment cost, time to actually take the equipment out on an hourly basis. Then all those monies come back into the budget to cover those costs that were expended.
Okay, my last question pertains to that. Is it possible that there's any excessive financial resources received from participating in that program that we could use for fuel mitigation and fuel, moving fuel breaks out within the wild and urban interface?
There are some dollars that can come back into the system from the equipment standpoint that often should be put back into the replacement of the equipment for the time that it's used. But all in all, the concept of the plan is to be reimbursable and not to make a profit.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Lang. So being as we're the city, we have kind of limited scope and control over what we can affect. And obviously you're the expert, but I'm just wondering, do you feel that we're doing everything that we can do as far as the perimeter of the city with making the homes around the perimeter fire resistant and developing those fuels reduction and fuel breaks that are essentially going to be kind of a moat around the city? Do you feel like that we can do better in that regard? Do you feel like we're doing good? I'm just trying to get a sense of where we're at with that.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. And the response is no, we need to do more. There is a lot more that can be done on that landscape level again. If we're truly going to make an impact in mitigating these fires and reducing their impact, then it's in the fuels. If you look at the several reports that have been done by the several of the wildland agencies, ODF and the Forest Service, they have been very detailed in pointing out that without significant investment in fuels reduction, we're going to continue to have significant fires.
Is there a group that continues to meet regularly and look for new ways that we should be improving this plan? And okay.
Yeah, so through emergency management, we have the Emergency Management Board. Its original organization or development of that board was to manage the fire plan. It has since expanded its responsibilities to include all hazard, all risk types of preparedness and discussions and collaboration. The plan itself now sits in preparedness. As we were working forward, there were lots of federal dollars available for grant opportunities to fund work. Those dollars have dried up. Without those dollars, it's hard to propel the plan forward beyond doing the public education portions, which is where most of our focus and energy have been. We continue to monitor, review, and update the plan as necessary. The concept behind the fire plan coordinator that they're looking to hire is to actually pick that back up and to put new energy into it, to refresh it, those relationships, and look for new opportunities. If more dollars become available for grant funding, then the plan is established, really brings two things to the table. One, it being a community wildfire protection plan, it checks a big box for any of those agencies who are looking for grant funding because they're part of it. They are a member of the plan, and that's usually a requirement for a lot of the federal dollars that are out there. So that's a big one. The other piece is that the plan lays out the coordination piece so that if there's multiple agencies going out after a limited pool of dollars, we are working to prioritize and make sure those dollars are being used the most effectively and going to the projects that are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck.
Thank you. Joel?
Lang, I'm ignorant, so I'm asking you to educate me. There's several BLM parcels adjacent to Grants Pass, Cathedral Hills, crosses my mind. The BLM piece out by Dollar Mountain, across the interstate, there's some BLM pieces, both up in Berlin and out by the college. They get a lot of money for fuels reduction. Are they prioritizing and have they completed work that complement what we're doing in the city? Like at Cathedral Hills, have they completed their work out there in terms of fuels reduction?
There's more work to be done. As a federal agency, they have had good times and bad times in accordance with what fundings and dollars are available. They do have some mandates to prioritize those dollars around urban interface areas, and they do that pretty well. But the amount of funding they've had over the years has dwindled dramatically. So you're not seeing quite the level of fuels work that's been done in the past. We're at a point of maintenance now where a lot of those areas have been previously treated in the last 10 years. They're way overdue for being treated again and maintained. and they've got some work to do.
Vanessa?
You outlined earlier that we have 9 Firewise communities. Are those in Josephine County? Are those in the city limits? And can you outline how big those communities are and how we may be able to grow that program?
So those 9 communities within the city of Grants Pass and their neighborhood level. And the biggest thing that we have found to encourage folks to do that is by getting on the ground and going into the communities and encouraging them to understand that there's these opportunities, there's work that they can do, there is ownership in protecting yourself and your community. It's hit and miss though, because communities today don't have quite the tight-knitness that they used to have in the last 20 years. And so you have to find the strong leadership within those communities who are willing to and have the capacity and ability to go do the work that they need to do to be designated.
Rick, and then Joel?
Lang, my brother-in-law just completed a camping trip which came up the Illinois River Trail, and they went through portions. They showed pictures going through where the Biscuit Fire burned through. And when I observed those pictures, I realized that's all wild area where you can't go in and do things. But the thing that really concerns me, I see all those dead trees standing there. Isn't that just waiting for a conflagration to occur a second time? If that were to catch fire?
For a potential reburn? Sure. Yeah, and it increasingly becomes more of a threat over time, because if those trees aren't removed, and then the new vegetation that comes in becomes new brush fields, those brush fields then add to the potential for newer ignitions and for reburns. So we've seen that over and over again as we've watched fires move through the Kamiopolis and into the Siskiyou Forest. Checo Bar, Biscuit Fire, you name them, they've all had those instances where those fires have come back through areas that were previously burned.
So no real answer with the legislation that's out there that doesn't allow, that ties everybody's hands?
But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of money and investment, and making it a prioritization to go in and restore the forest back to its healthy state.
Okay, thank you.
Joel, then Brian, then Vanessa?
You know, Rick, just in response to your question too, I've seen flame lengths 200 feet high in those type of situations, and I've seen wildfire advance 9 miles in 15 minutes, which means you could be 9 miles away and you got 15 minutes to get out. So it gets worse and worse. But anyway, Lang, would it be helpful if the city council took up a topic to draft a letter to BLM to encourage them to do the fuels reduction and prioritize the work around the city on BLM land?
It could. We need to chat with our partners a little bit more and see where their positioning is really at.
Okay, could you do that and get back to us?
Sure.
And because, you know, a letter sometimes can help them get funding and can help us be safer.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and the people that live around Cathedral Hills and Dollar Mountain and so forth would like that.
Yeah, so a lot of that collaborative work is already being done with the Dollar Mountain Project. So those folks from BLM who are in the know and have the authority to make those decisions are at the table. Mm-hmm. And we're working together with them jointly. So I know that they have some focus and priority for those.
Do they have funding for it?
I don't know. Well, we'll have to go back and ask them.
Ask them if a letter from us would help.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And we always put that option on the table for them, so all the partners know that we can be mutually supportive that way.
Brian?
Yeah, so this topic is super important because if the town burns down, none of the other topics we talk about matter. So this is, in my opinion, a real priority. And you put on the summary slide, it will take years of committed leadership and aggressive investment. And I'm just wondering, you don't have to necessarily answer this right now, but my question is what does that look like? What does years of leadership and aggressive investment look like as far as fuels reduction and enhancing the perimeter of the town with regards to fire-resistant homes and dwellings and essentially just protecting the town?
So that's a broad spectrum option that is part of the ongoing conversation that we may choose to do, to talk about where we're at now, what work has been done, and then you can do the top of the line, fully aggressive, let's make a change in the next 18 to 24 months impact to the community, which is really a community level mobilization. That's not necessarily realistic, and where we've been and are at has been good and positive and is reinforced by doing the work that's necessary for raising awareness and building self-resiliency in the community, but it doesn't take a huge amount of dollar investment. So you're in the spectrum now where you can have conversations about whether we put on a fuels program. We hire folks that are trained to do wildland fuel mitigation. We actually stand up a crew, 4 or 5 people. They have equipment, training are necessary, and they can go out and do fuels work on public-owned lands and or supplement and support private folks in their homes. There might be some ways to subsidize that work that's done for those who can't afford or don't have the physical capability to go out and do the work for themselves. We go at it from a strategic standpoint of reinforcing our perimeter and then actually working into the city limits and then making them available to go outside city limits to help our partners as well. You could cross-train them so that they have the capability of doing wildfire fighting during the summer months so that we can utilize them as a hand crew and doing those sorts of things. They could be part of Dollar Mountain. You could look at contracting that work like we do through Grayback Forestry for the work we're doing on Dollar Mountain. It could be an emphasis by this council to put dollars and resources towards other activities for doing fuels management and for doing the recovery and preparedness work. I can't put a dollar figure on it, but it is going to be significant. You're adding considerably to our resource depth and capacity to be able to be proactive about stepping out. Along with that question comes often, well, what about grant dollars? The grant environment is a difficult one to try to manage that level of program and work because you're feast or famine. Either the resources are available or they're not. It's hard to keep good people on staff if you're not keeping them for the year, and to get them trained and give them the expertise they need, to buy the resources, specific equipment, those sorts of things to do the work in and of itself. Oftentimes the programs that seem to be the most successful are the ones where the community steps up, does the initial investment and shows that they have the buy-in. Then when those grant dollars come available, then those communities become priority to actually give the dollars to when they're available because they're established and they're demonstrating that they've actually taken the initiative. There are all kinds of other opportunities that are out there. We don't do any burning now within city limits per se in terms of prescribed burning, where we can go in and do pre-season low intensity burns to remove the fuels as part of our maintenance. There's evacuation planning. There's a whole gamut of stuff that can be done once we start to sit down and look at what we'd like to achieve. So that's that broad spectrum.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you throwing those ideas out there. And I think a lot of those things you just said are good ideas. And given that we are at such a high risk for wildfire around our community, I think it would be worthwhile for council to at least be able to consider those ideas and to have a little bit more detail on what those would look like and how much those might cost. And so once we're done, I would entertain, if council's interested in hearing and getting more detail about those ideas. Thanks.
Vanessa?
What's the agency's policy around red flag warnings and recalling staff?
We will deal with each red flag warning based on what the conditions are within the flag warning itself and what region is going to be impacted. We will make a judgment call based on what the regional staffing capability is, so time of year. So we're in the summer months, what vacations folks are off on, what's our ability to recall people back in a timely fashion if they happen to be on leaves. What our neighbors' staffing looks like. We'll also look at what the regional fire impact at the moment is. Do we have fires in our region? Do we have extra resources available? Are there fires outside the region that are drawing down local resources? We'll look at any number one of those factors, including the predicted weather and fire starts that we currently have in the region, and then we'll staff accordingly from there.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? All right, this isn't a topic that's, on a future agenda. There's no decision that really needs to be made, but is there anything that anybody would like to request before we go ahead, Vanessa?
It's not necessarily a request, but over the weekend, I did read the Rogue Valley Integrated Fire Plan, and it is a wonderful document. It does encompass the whole county, and it even goes into specific communities that have decided to make their own community wildfire protection plan. It does outline that when communities tailor their own, they're more successful because they understand the socioeconomic status of those communities, they understand the relationship of those communities to their government, and so on and so forth, and they know what works for them. So I think implementing some of the ideas that you've brought forward with the question that you asked, I think if we created our own community wildfire protection plan outside of this, more tailored to our community, I think it would be successful for us here.
But what I would recommend is not necessarily a community wildfire protection plan specific to the city as much as a wildfire resiliency plan for the city, which is more point specific to adaptive communities and on the groundwork.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other final thoughts before we move on for the day? Brian?
Yeah, I would second that. I think that developing a wildfire resiliency plan for the city specifically, in addition to the Rogue Valley plan, would be a worthwhile thing to do. And I would hope that maybe part of that plan and its development would include some of those recommendations that Lang offered earlier.
All righty. Any other thoughts on that? How to move it forward, Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to say, do I need to actually specifically ask for other counselors to weigh in on this?
Go for it, Rob.
Yeah, I completely agree that, especially because we've got issues in the county that we can't control. So since we never know for sure what's going to happen outside the city limits, we really do need our own specific plan because that's actually who we're responsible to. So I agree with Brian.
Other thoughts? All right, well, we have at least some council interest in moving forward on developing a city-specific resiliency plan, so.
So then maybe as a next step, what I can do is bring a little more detail into this conversation in another workshop where we'll focus a little bit more on resiliency and some of the options that are out there for taking this maybe to another step or two.
Sounds perfect, thank you. All right.
Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks for being here today and for allowing us to move you forward on the schedule. Now we're going to hop back to Doug Bradley with the DMO, and we have our paperwork in front of us.
Well, once again, thank you for the opportunity, Mayor Bristol and the councilors, to be able to present at this time. And I think where we left off is we were open to questions from the council.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So in looking at the report from DMO Pros and then looking at the tentative budget that has been presented, there's a little bit of a difference. And actually even a third point I've in discussion also heard, and this is around the funding for the DMO.
Sure.
The draft budget has a number of $700,000. I've also heard a number of 35% of the tourism dollars, which I think is approximately $740,000. And then in the DMO pros report, it recommended at least a budget of 500,000 so that the DMO could be funded enough to have the means to do operations. So I guess my first question is, 500,000 and 740,000, that's a wide gap. And so why would the city fund 740 if DMO Pros was recommending 500,000 or more?
Well, the reason is to be able to give the executive director the best opportunity for success for Josephine County and the city of Grants Pass. The information I gave you kind of showed you a middle of the road would be the 700,000 in comparison to what is spent with other DMOs in the state of Oregon. And a lot of our effort is going to be centered around trying to kind of attract a high-quality executive director to operate the DMO and give them their best chance for success. And again, we do have the funding. It is there. So we have the opportunity to jump in and have a huge impact on tourism in Josephine County and Grants Pass. My goal is not to leave anything on the table as far as how we can support and fund our DMO.
Thank you.
Other questions? Rob, then Rick?
Thanks, Doug. So the information that I guess you guys probably provided about some of the comparisons between other cities, McMinnville, Roseburg, I think that's what you guys probably prepared that, yeah. I found that really helpful. What for me would have been even more helpful is if all the cities had been compared in each specific area, meaning that, reading through the information you sent, some of them had a 3-year contract, some of them had a 2-year contract, some of them had a 90-day termination, some, ours is being proposed as maybe 120 days. But as far as the percentage of funds that's going to be used for manpower, and as far as how much the executive director is paid for all these other cities, that would have been, for me, really helpful to, we have a picture of how much per hotel room, we're spending and all that, but I would have, I almost feel guilty asking volunteers to come up with spreadsheets and more data, because I know that's what you guys are, volunteers here, and as you mentioned, you have 2 years in already.
Yeah.
But for me, that would have been really much more helpful to have every aspect. So we're comparing apples to apples to apples across all of those cities, and we get a sense of how much the executive directors make in other cities, and how much they're spending on manpower across the board, and so forth. And there was, let me just see if there's anything else here. The frequency of reviews, what is reviewed. Like, I found a really unusual piece in the McMinnville contract that you sent, and that seems like every May, the DMO there has to present to council, and if council doesn't like what they see, they can cut the funding for that year. And that, to me, just seemed ridiculous to wait till May to have that discussion on any given year. So I kind of like the concept, but, I'm not sure what other cities do, but it just made me think in our city, we would want to do something like that in January or December when the DMO still had time to pivot. But I'm just saying, that's just from my one counselor's perspective, that one piece of information. But I would have liked to see them all for the cities that you mentioned. Again, the type of, the length of the contract, what's reviewed, how much they spend, how much the executive director spends, and things of that nature. That for me would have been an easier picture.
Sure, and that's understandable, but one thing I'd have to point out is we're not comparing apples to apples to begin with. Some of these cities are very different in the assets they possess and the overall goal that they have for their DMO and even how they're funded. So it is very difficult to give you an apples to apples comparison. In addition to, some of this information is not as easy to get a hold of as you might think. People work on it. I was not one of them. I have other duties on the starter board. But pulling this information together is not as easy as you would think. And we're not really comparing apples to apples.
Well, as far as apples to apples go, when when, you know, the DMO Starter Board has said we need a 5-year contract to be able to attract somebody that's a high-quality person. I don't see a 5-year contract in anything that you sent us. And to me, I would call that fairly close to apples, you know?
Sure.
How long of a contract and why. So the fact that nobody else seems to be at 5 years, and the fact that my bias is that 5 years is probably way too long, it just makes me think that, you know, 5 years is probably too long unless, you know, there was other cities that had that and they could justify it. So I think there's a lot of apples to apples as far as the percentage that's spent on manpower, as far as the, you know, what the executive director makes compared to the overall budget. I mean, those things are all close to apples, you know, understanding that, of course, Bend is twice as, you know, it's more than twice our budget, you know, and more than twice or what they, you know, per room and all that, you know, all that sort of thing. But, and I also understand, you know, what you're saying, it's not that easy necessarily to just snap your fingers and get that information. I'm just saying for me that some of those things, length of contract, amount the executive director makes, those things would have been helpful for me.
Well, the DMO pros, I think, is where we came up with the 5%. We have many discussions around that. And the 5% we feel would be a good contract amount for an executive director to have enough time with the contract to be able to be effective. And that's kind of where that conversation had come from. And we believe that to be true. You know, we do want to give this executive director as much benefit as we can. The second thing to that is we do have enough oversight. So it's not like if you award a 5-year term that you're stuck with the 5-year term. Wouldn't be the outcome of that document. We do have the oversight from council, board of directors, to make sure that we're seeing what we need to see from the executive director. And we're all in that together. That's what we want to see. We want to see success. And we have a great opportunity right now for that. And part of it is we're in the midst of an opportunity that may not come up again. So I think it's imperative that we take every opportunity to achieve the highest levels that we can with the time frame that we're in.
Rick?
So Doug, when you put together the contract for the DMO, is it possible to include a matrix of standards that are to be met? Or do you do a deliverable sort of after the fact that they've met certain goals or expectations? And does this have to be spelled out for the DMO so they're collecting that information as they go along?
Well, we would want to know kind of ahead of time what the expectation is, and we would have that. But I also think that we need to understand the skills of the specific executive director that we may be looking at to be able to do that. The Grants Pass City did provide the business metric that largely kind of, I think, outlines a little bit of what you're talking about. So we do have that draft document that can be used to kind of form a guideline of what we would expect from an executive director.
Joel?
I thank you for being here today, obviously, and I thank you for your valuable time. As we look ahead, it seems to me, and see, I want to know if your opinion is the same. It seems to me like right now, if I remember correctly, our lodging rate is 85%, or maybe it was 81%, but it was fairly high in terms of our occupancy rate. Talking to the people that are financial advisors, they say that the currency now in the hands of the public, the savings account, the cash in the hands of the public is at an all-time high, and that as the pandemic, as we get vaccinated, there's a pent-up demand.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it seems like there's going to be a big return on investment coming up here in the next 2 to 3 years. Would you disagree with that?
I would not disagree with that at all. Our hotels right now seem to be running at summer occupancy levels already and have done so for about the last month. Before that, it was still pretty good. So So yes, I would agree with that, hesitantly, because again, there are factors that we can't predict. But I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that we were going to get a huge ROI on the $700,000 that I'm asking for. I just wouldn't be here if, and this is regardless of the pandemic. I think it would pay off either way.
Other questions for Doug? Brian?
Yeah, I have a question. This may or may not be for you. This might be for staff, but I'm just curious about I think last time we talked about this, we were going to wait for an updated contract. I think there were some things that were going to be changed, and I was just wondering when we might be seeing those documents.
So you'll be getting the draft later on this week, but it's scheduled for your Monday workshop. Next Monday workshop, we're discussing the contract aspect of it.
Great. Thank you.
Rob?
And I know that Doug and you and I discussed this, and I know that it was mentioned in front of the council as well. I still have a pretty big problem with the fact that there's in your bylaws, there's nothing that says that there should be representatives from the CBD, Central Business District, or the Historic District. They're pretty much the same thing. There's nothing in your bylaws that says that. So I just still don't necessarily, and I know that in the contract that we looked at over the weekend, I think you had some downtown money set aside for downtown funding, and it was less than 1% of the whole budget. So I understand that you guys are not doing events, and I understand that you're not downtown centric or anything like that, but I kind of looked at that 1% in combination with the fact that there was no historic downtown representatives required in your bylaws. I just still feel that that's a real major gap or lack of what we've received. It would be a little bit different if we had a downtown association. Don't know if that's ever really going to happen again. I feel that it's the council's responsibility to basically look after the interests of the historic downtown, and that's why I'm saying these things. But I still haven't seen really any tangible evidence that the DMO board really values the historic downtown.
Well, it's on our agenda to amend that in our bylaws, so that will be in there. And that needs to be voted on by the board this Friday. We have discussed it, so that'll come back on Friday for a vote, and we all feel that that's important, and it's important to the council. And preserving our downtown is important to the starter board, as it will be to our executive director. The downtown is a tourism asset, and I don't think that that's going to go anywhere. I will say that we haven't had a lot of interest in downtown folks applying to be on the board of directors. So we've actually gone on our own to try to reach out and inspire some of that on our own without just going to people that we think would be a good fit. So we are actively pursuing that kind of input from the downtown area.
So in the budget, where $6,500 was budgeted for downtown projects or whatever, what specifically did you guys have in mind?
Just downtown support, whatever that may be. We didn't really have an idea in mind. Again, this is a draft budget of something that you might expect to see. I would expect a much clearer and detailed budget to come from an executive director. You know, one of the disadvantages that we've had in this whole process is trying to put the cart in front of the horse. You know, we don't have the person in place that would give us, you know, kind of the expectation that we could put before you at this point. So that's kind of where we are.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, Doug, I just want to thank you and the other starter board members for putting so much work into this. I think everyone on the starter board and everyone on council wants the DMO to succeed. We all want tourism in Grants Pass to thrive. So, you know, this is just a healthy conversation to make sure that we're maximizing this opportunity that we have. And so I do have just one more question. When I was looking at these, the comparisons of the numbers on the different colored Excel sheet there, what I did is I took the total revenue for each city, Ashland, Bend, Roseburg, Medford. I left Eugene, Lane County out because it's like an order of magnitude different. And then I just divided that by what the marketing budget would be. And I understand that, you know, it's a draft budget. But the ratio of the money spent on marketing for the other 4 cities was about 65% of the total budget. And in the draft budget for the DMO, it's only about 46%, which is a pretty wide disparity. So I just wanted to, you know, if you hadn't run that calculation, I wanted to make you aware and that it didn't quite match up with what the other cities were doing.
Well, off the top of my head, I would point that we aren't really planning to, in this budget, and that could change wildly as far as having what we get from an executive director put in place, but there's no summer marketing or promotions planned out of that budget.
Thanks.
Are some of these items also startup costs that maybe wouldn't be repeated on year 2, like $40,000 for website development?
Yes.
Would go down considerably the following year? DJ?
Hey Doug, has there been thought consideration at least for revenue resources? You have them listed here, for example, advertising, sponsorships, donations, et cetera. Have you begun that thought process about where you would reach out for those and what kind of anticipated revenues you might garner from them?
Donations
For
coming.
example, the Ashland sponsorships, 40,000. I think that was the only one that had an example of it, but.
Well, I think that's going to open up opportunities in the future for sponsorship. I know that our direction is to operate a fully funded destination marketing organization free of the requirement of sponsorships. And the reason that the DMO pros put that in there is to just point out that it's a benefit of having a board operate the DMO independent from the city. You're going to have greater opportunity for sponsorships through a private entity versus city government.
I have a question, just it's cut off on the sheet in front of me. We have $95,000 for Experience Grants Pass, and then the next word is cut off. Do you recall what that was? It's towards the bottom of the
What color is that?
blue. It's the bottom, towards the bottom of the blue column.
I'm showing grant fund,
Grant fund.
experience grants past grant fund.
Yeah, that's a grant fund.
Okay, what kind of thing would you anticipate that going towards?
It could go towards a few different things. You know, if, you know, Dollar Mountain were needing some funding for promotions or things like that, it would be something where somebody could come before the board and give off the grant, and then we would determine whether it falls into the realm of tourism or something that we'd be interested in sponsoring.
I'm just thinking, as far as Councilor De La Grange's question, that is approximately, you know, I mean, that's almost $100,000 out of your $700,000 that would probably essentially be marketing dollars. It's just in a different category at the moment. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, and our goal was to have money and funds available to assist the growth of demand generators and assets within Josephine County and Grants Pass. You know, some of these numbers may not be exactly accurate, but it certainly is something that we want to be able to do, is put those funds back into the community in one way or another, following the guidelines of tourism as well, making sure that those are met.
Other questions? DJ?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just asking about certain items, not getting too much into the weeds here, but website development, $40,000. So is this an anticipated cost to revamp the current website, or is the idea to just totally redo it? I'm not a website expert, but I do know we have one, and it seems to do well. I'm just curious about that number.
We have not had a bunch of conversations about that in particular, only that we do need to revamp the web page and give the executive director the opportunity to come in and make it their own and operate that. Whether that would be $40,000 or $20,000 is hard
Sure.
to be able to put out there for you at this point.
Other questions? I have another question, Doug. Could you give us an idea of some of the things that Grants Pass might want to market, or that the DMO would want to market as far as our tourism
Sure.
assets?
Golf tournaments, mountain bike races, soccer. Horse racing. One of the reasons I feel that I'm asking for what we're asking for is Josephine County has tremendous tourism assets, and I think we've got everybody in Southern Oregon beat when it comes to that standpoint. My own vision, and I share this with the Starter Board, is not just to put together a destination marketing organization, but one that is envied and looked upon by other DMOs as what are they doing? We need to do what they're doing in Grants Pass. And we have the opportunity ahead of us right now. I understand the $500,000, $200,000, but why not put that money in there if it's going to help? We have it available, and that's only going to increase our ability on the ROI end of it. In my experience, most of my success has come from areas of discomfort. Reverting back to comfort zones has never really served me or in my observation, other people very well. I would just have you at this moment consider that in getting back to something that we're maybe overall comfortable with may not produce the level of success that we would be looking for. In fact, I think we would have more to lose by not being all in than we realize in the situation. So that's why I'm up here, kind of pushing you guys to really be all in on this. And again, I'm not asking you to just throw it in and forget about it. We have oversight. We have people keeping an eye on the ball. Not just you, but I certainly don't want to be standing up here and in a year from now looking at you guys saying, well, guess what? I was wrong about everything. That would not be something I want. I think we have a great opportunity right here. We've just talked about, kind of the impending bursting of the balloon after the pandemic of people traveling and getting out and getting back to normal, maybe even experiencing things that they haven't done in the past. One caveat to that is a city like Grants Pass is in a perfect place to capitalize on that type of demand. People don't want to go to New York City. They don't want to go to Portland. They don't even want to go to Disneyland anymore. We have an ideal area to really elevate tourism and to be able to put in place a program that has never been done before. And at least for the city of Grants Pass. And I think it's a huge opportunity, and I just don't want us to miss that.
Thank you. And then my other question is, because I've heard somebody say this is a lot of money to spend on Facebook ads, what are some of the ways that marketing funds might be spent that aren't a social media ad boost?
Well, I'll be honest, those are not questions that I'm going to be able to answer for you. I would have my own idea, but, somebody that operates a destination marketing organization would be much better and adept at answering those questions. Even Stephen, who's done a great job of keeping us alive, could answer those questions as well. So,
I think it might be good for council to hear. Maybe Terry, are you able to help us out with that?
Yeah, can I back up and answer a couple of other questions too?
Sure.
And I think both of them are specific to Brian. I want to go back and, the recommendation from DMO Pros at 500,000 to how we got today at 700,000. When DMO Pros did that audit, rewinding and reminding the fact that this project started 2 years ago, we were at a 300,000 budget and they were saying we were underfunded. 500,000 was really to become effective. I'll remind you that the Tourism Advisory Committee advised the council to raise the tax by 2%, and council chose to raise the tax by 3%. And per state statute, now we're locked into spending 70% of that additional tax on it. And so both from the Tourism Advisory Committee standpoint and the Starter Board standpoint, it's okay, there's money there. 500,000 was the ante of the game. We sincerely felt that council at that time, although there was some help needed in general fund and police, was buying into the fact that our tourism program that we're putting together is going to be next level. And I feel like we've stepped back from that. So it's a little bit discouraging. To back up Doug on the marketing side, and thank you, Mayor, for pointing it out, that grant program would certainly back up other projects that the city are working on with the events. if somebody is willing to take on back to the 50s, they're going to be starting it up from scratch basically too after missing a year, a new organization. We can come in with the marketing of that. And again, hiring a true marketing professional and a DMO, somebody, Doug and I have worked with before, but it's not us. I mean, the person that we're looking for is going to be a step up from even what we do. But as another reminder, I work with Travel Lane County. I meet with Kevney at Visit Bend every single week. I meet with Eli in the Medford DMO position. And it's not just to sit here and say, well, let's put $100,000 in Facebook ads. Let's put $50,000 in billboards. Let's put $200,000 in airport advertising. We need to step back and do, I know the Tourism Advisory Committee has also recommended a feasibility study. On my Travel Lane County board right now, they're purchasing cell phone data that says, where are people coming from? How long are they staying? What are they doing when they're here? And so it's not just a bunch of people sitting around a room thinking, gosh, maybe a Facebook ad would be awesome. These people are professionals. They're targeting, they're finding, they're doing the analysis needed. It's not something that the group of us here can answer clearly today. The group of us here today can set some goals and say, we've got an opportunity to put somebody in Grants Pass like we've never had. So could I come up with ideas on how we would target marketing and find out, let me use a local super small example. I worked for a company here locally that identified that, gosh, we have a whole bunch of people that come over from Brookings to go to the hospital. We didn't just start marketing in Brookings and figure out that worked. It was research, it was development, it was stakeholder engagement. And then we targeted that marketing and said, okay, if it is seniors or people coming from Brookings to go to the hospital, we didn't put those at Little League games, we're putting them in the silver pages, or we're putting them where those people are at. And so I think it's a whole lot more than us just sitting here saying, gosh, how do we place Facebook ads?
Thank you, Terry. Any other questions for Doug or Terry?
Let's see.
Yes, DJ.
So, my mic's been on for a while. Hopefully I haven't been whispering things to myself. So, I know that inside of here there are some sprinkled sort of startup costs inside of here. I'd like those kind of delineated to know what we can expect could be a startup cost officially, referenced against what your operating costs in the future would be. Would that be possible to get from you?
Yeah, but it's hard to be 100% accurate on that. I mean,
Sure.
That's kind of
understand.
just the issue that we've had, and we would love to give that information to you, and we certainly want to be as transparent with everything as we can. I certainly hope we have. You all have my business card. You can email me, call me anytime you want with questions. That's something we can work on and just kind of see what we can do. And really all we're doing is kind of taking averages from what other DMOs that are similar are doing. So that's kind of where that would come from.
Sure. Well, thank you for your efforts heretofore.
Certainly.
I would leave it, and Councilor Pell, we did put in there a salary line, so that is an apples to apples item. We've put a lot of work into this, but if any of you would like to talk to other mayors, councilors that sit on the boards that I represent throughout the state, if you want to talk to their DMOs or board members, I would be happy to make those connections for you.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here, and I see Tamara in the audience as well, so thanks for all your time and effort on this.
Yeah,
And we
thank
have
you, and it's been a pleasure.
We have a very related presentation coming up next. We have travel, tourism, allocation of resources conversation, and it looks like Adam is stepping up.
So good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My presentation is on the Tourism Division specifically. This will be a summary of the activity in the Tourism Division starting from FY15 up through FY21. I will note that FY21 is not complete at this moment, so this is only year-to-date activity that you'll see on the following slides. The relationship to council goals is to provide cooperative shared leadership involving council, staff, and the community, and to engage economic opportunities. First, to touch on the division resources. So the revenue sources that come into the tourism division, it's a fairly small and easy list. Number one being transfers from the lodging tax fund. Historically, based on how the ordinance was a couple months ago, that was 30% of the net proceeds from lodging tax went to the tourism division, but now, with the new ordinance, that's going to be 40% going forward. One other item that you'll see on the chart down at the bottom with $150,000 is a transfer back from the Land and Buildings Capital Fund to the tourism division. That's not going to be likely to reoccur, so that's certainly not an ongoing funding source. And then the only other resource that it has is if revenues are greater than expenditures, the difference increases the restricted fund balance, meaning any tourism dollars that lodging tax funds that the tourism division doesn't spend are saved still for that specific purpose. And then if expenditures are greater than revenues in a given year, the division will either draw down on those restricted fund balance or will use general fund discretionary dollars. This slide is the history and the breakdown of the expenditures in the tourism division back starting in FY17. And I believe the copy that you have has a lot of red boxes on there, and that is to kind of delineate different groupings within the services. Well, let me start with personnel first. So we do have a small percentage of personnel being paid for by the tourism division because it does take staff time to administer contracts and all of the rest of these expenditures that you see below. So then going into the services, you can see that first box, NUSA is who the tourism contract was with previously, and I broke that down between the contract itself and then some of those special events that used tourism dollars in the past. That next section are organizations or activities that tourism dollars were used to support in the last several years. This group is really kind of the activity that the city has managed this year without a tourism contractor. And the bottom section are some unavoidable expenditures like utilities, insurance, property management, that's taking care of the visitor center downtown. And then we've got admin and IT, which is a percentage of all the expenditures. And then down there at the bottom, you see transfers to land and building capital funds. So in that case, there's a surplus of tourism dollars that was transferred to LB, and I believe that same $150,000 that you see in the FY17 column is what's being transferred back in the resources on that first slide that I showed you. To move on to the cost implication, council has discretion on $847,600 and how that will be distributed. That's based on an assumption of how we think lodging taxes are going to come in and how tourism activity is going to occur in the next year. Right now, that assumption is we're going to do at least as good as we did this year. So hopefully it will be better than that. The obvious statement is that the more funds we give to the DMO, the fewer funds or the less funds there are for city-managed activities or for tourism-related facilities. Any of those expenditures, which are showed in the last slide, that might end up not being paid by the tourism division may need to be redistributed to other departments, or that activity would need to be eliminated. And I called out just a couple of those. That personnel cost, $20,000. If council's decision was to not use any tourism dollars or not use the tourism division to fund that, then a different department would have to pick up that $20,000. Property management, that's another one that the building must be maintained. Admin and IT costs coming into this next budgeted year is going to be about $70,000, and that is a large increase from what you see historically, but that's also because we have a lot more tourism dollars coming into the fund, and the expenditures now are also increasing. Therefore, this percentage rate for admin and IT is also increasing. And then I put the Chamber of Commerce on there as well. Just those four items alone add up to $191,000. I believe council received a memo fairly recently that had this chart on it, and this is kind of the trade-off between giving X amount of dollars to the DMO and how much would be retained by the city. And it's very important to point out that that top blue portion, being the remainder, is for tourism division and for tourism facilities. That top portion, that top 247,400, not that one. There we go. This is the amount that is going to the Land and Buildings Capital Fund according to the ordinance. This bottom section is what we're talking about for the tourism division specifically, and that's what council has discretion over on how to use those funds in the tourism division. This graph is just to zoom in specifically on the tourism division. So for example, the Tourism Advisory Committee's recommendation of 35% would be $741,000 to the DMO, which would leave only $106,000 for the city-managed activities. Talking about funding options, you have a couple of different options, which could be funding the DMO based on a percentage of lodging tax revenue, which has been discussed in the past, or it could be a set amount with CPI adjustments, CPI standing for Consumer Price Index, just to account for inflation and normal cost increases, or it could be a set amount. The two graphs below are a demonstration of assuming 5% annual growth in activity. The blue line is the percentage model. So as the activity increases each year, the percentage or the amount of money based on that percentage would also increase at that same rate. The orange lines in both graphs represent just following that CPI increase of 3% annually. And then the gray line is the set amount. The set amount is probably the most likely for someone to be interested in renegotiating the contract amount. So that's just there for comparison purposes. Obviously, if there's 5% annual growth, there's not a lot of difference between 5% growth and the 3% cost increase with the CPI, whereas if there's 10% annual growth, that's a pretty big difference. I would assume that the market is not going to lend to a perfect 10% annual increase, and so that might plateau out depending on the infrastructure, the tourism infrastructure that we have. There could be many reasons for that growth to fluctuate. If you think about the funding options as an investment and start to think about the return on investment, one would also think about risk and return, which have a direct relationship. The more risk, the more return, and vice versa. So with the percent of revenue model, that's actually low risk for the city and high risk for the DMO, whereas the CPI adjustments is high risk for the city and low risk for the DMO. And to demonstrate that, you see the chart behind me. Let's imagine that a pandemic suddenly came out of nowhere and mandated shutdowns occurred during the busiest tourism season of the year. In that case, if the activity reduced 15%, then the revenue that the DMO received would also reduce 15%, which may be very different than what had originally been budgeted or projected, and based on the timing of expenditures, they might have already spent those funds. Is a possibility as well. However, with the CPI model, demonstrating that it's actually riskier for the city, is that if we were based on a CPI model, the city would still be responsible for paying the DMO that CPI increase amount, even if the lodging tax revenue that came in was much less than anticipated. So the call to action is to, at some point, determine the funding method or the amount for the DMO contract. The call to action date is, of course, at council's discretion, and your alternatives, just to summarize those again, is to potentially contract with the DMO based on a percent of net lodging tax revenue, based on a set amount with CPI adjustments perhaps, or based on an alternate method, or to not contract with the DMO. And with that, I can take any questions or provide some further explanation.
Thanks, Adam. Do we have council questions? Rob?
Yeah, in reviewing over, and I can't remember which other city I think, had something along those lines. But I think one city that we looked at had kind of a hybrid plan. In other words, let's just say that hotel taxes went up a huge percentage. There would be, the DMO would get a certain percentage of that, but there was a cap. And I don't know if you caught which city that was, but I know one city seems to have a cap on what the increase could be. In other words, the percentage would stay the same unless the increase became so large that it was felt that that was excessive. So there can be some kind of hybrid between these two. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The two examples I gave are definitely fairly extreme. And a hybrid could mitigate some of that risk or hedge that risk.
Other questions? Rick?
Thank you, Aaron. So if you're in the sales position selling products and you sell so many products and you get a percentage once you go over a certain amount, can we put that in the contract as well? I don't know if you can, the problem is coming up with a gauge to realize that that person is actually generating it versus just the conditions. Or are some of these other methods probably safer?
I believe there's lots of options, and that kind of lends to the hybrid method that Councilor Pell mentioned. So that's very much at council's discretion.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. On one of the earlier slides, you had that transfer amount back from the LB Capital Fund of $150,000. I think it was even earlier, yeah. I was just wondering if you could explain what that was.
I don't remember the project off the top of my head, but that project ended up not going forward. It might be the convention center. I'm not 100% positive about that.
Okay, that's fine. And then you also said on the slide that had all the red boxes, you explained the personnel line, and then on the slide following that, there's essentially, it looks like what we have is 3 lines that are costs that the city uses. There's the personnel costs, the property management, and then the admin and IT costs. And those together, it looks like are $113,000. The 70 and the 20 and the 23, I think that's 113.
You've only got 3 lines?
No, I'm not talking about the chamber line.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, that seems like a lot of money for us to administrate the tourism dollars. So I'm just wondering how we could adjust that downward.
So on that one, that's just the funding model that we have for the administration fund and the IT fund. It's based on charging a specific percentage of the expenditures. Because there's personnel cost in there, that goes into the cost of HR. So for example, I believe Brad's position is part of that cost. The total administration cost of a position is partially being funded by tourism dollars because part of that time, part of that personnel, that staff's time is toward tourism, but there's HR and admin to administer all of that personnel time. So it's all split up. That could be changed, but basically that's $70,000 that would need to be paid for from somewhere else.
Yeah, I see it, to go on that my time that I've spent over the past couple of years with travel and tourism and along with Brad and before Brad, Laura and admin and finance, we're probably under that 8 point. They're probably getting a good deal based on the time that we spend on and that we spend on the contracts for travel and tourism.
Okay. And then just one other quick question. I know that last year during the pandemic, we probably really underspent the tourism dollars, and I'm just wondering if you have an idea of how much surplus we have currently.
I don't have the current numbers available at this moment. We have one more quarter of lodging tax coming in, which will really be the final determination of how much extra we end up with this year. let's see. That's 161. Yeah, I don't have the final numbers right here to be able to tell you that, but it's, I'd hate to give you a guess. I apologize.
Sure, sure. Would you guess that it's a substantial amount?
It's over $100,000 for sure.
Okay, thanks.
I have a quick question on the difference between these two charts that say cost implication, and they're the green and orange charts. I didn't follow what the difference is between the two.
Was it this one?
Yes. Yeah, there's two that both say cost implication on the top.
Yeah.
There you
So
go.
this one is the cost implication of the amount going to the DMO and the remainder that the city keeps, but that's actually made up of two portions. One being the amount that goes to the Land and Buildings Capital Fund, and the rest going to the Tourism Division. So in the top of the chart up here, this is the one that says Tourism Division and Tourism Facilities, whereas the next slide is just to zoom in specifically only for the Tourism Division.
Gotcha. So the second slide is a portion of the first slide.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. DJ, you're up next.
You probably mentioned this. I had to step out for a second at the beginning of your presentation. That Noosa Corporation cost of upwards of $200,000, $300,000, what is that cost for the tourism division expenditures? The very first line up there, well, third line.
I mean, as a,
Yeah, what does that represent, that cost?
That was their contract. That was part of that contract cost that we had,
The John Bowen contract.
the John Bowen contract.
Oh, okay, yes, sure.
Yeah, that was his company. It's a little confusing.
Okay.
Noosa.
Got it. I've always associated Experience Grants Pass, and now that it was mentioned, that is, okay, yeah. So, given that information and that we have some of these costs that are not going to be represented on this anymore, do you have a estimated revenue need that the city has for tourism division expenditures?
so this slide was an attempt to kind of get at the bare minimum of that. $191,000 is just for those four items right there and nothing else.
Okay, and then that wouldn't include, let's see, so we have personnel, property, admin, IT, Chamber of Commerce. That wouldn't include any sponsorship or events or other money that we might need. So what I'm asking is to just kind of extrapolate using historical figures to see what that number would be outside of that bare minimum.
I believe this active club number is Boatnik. As you can see, it's not very consistent with the other activities or organizations, so that's also at council's discretion as far as what you guys would like to support.
Sure, because I think it would be a really good exercise to at least extrapolate or try to entertain what that would be. At this point, it's guesswork. Is that 300,000? Is it 350,000? I don't have any idea of what council's expectations for sponsorships or et cetera, or events that we want to contribute to reference against how much money are we going to need to cover those?
So 2 years ago, we made the conscious effort a year and a half ago to say we, from a general fund perspective, need to try to keep our general fund as whole as possible. So some of the travel and tourism dollars are general fund in nature. They're part of that flexibility that we have. That was part of the original 9%. And historically, when the TCA folded, we did take on a number of events, including Back to the 50s, which we provided $15,000 for when we provided that to Noosa, including the Grand Illumination and the Christmas Parade, which was $10,000 that we gave to Noosa. So now you're up to $25,000. And then 4th of July was another one that we brought forward. We gave Noosa $22,000 for that. And then we've historically always had Art Along the Road, which is somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000, depending on how you're organizing it each year. So those are the events that we had sponsored. Council, and council can always make a change in the policy, but their current policy is we're not doing sponsorships we're not sponsoring and being the primary sponsor. We will provide sponsorships like we do for the Active Club, which we provide them $5,000. Or like we did for Porch Fest, $1,500, because it's just for advertising. So our sponsorships moving forward from the direction that we've received in the past is any sponsorship for events are for advertising purposes, utilizing travel and tourism dollars, because the general fund dollars aren't available to help do major event sponsorship.
Yes, I understand that, and hopefully everybody on this dais does as well. We're not going to be the primary sponsor. We're not going to be funding them in the entirety, but I think that we've shown willingness to at least contribute some portion of our tourism dollars to help with those sponsorships and events.
So you'd be looking at, from the biggest one being back to the 50s at $5,000. For all the other events, anywhere from Porch Fest from $1,500 up to $5,000. So the other events, you'd be probably looking at a range in between. And those are dollars that they have to actually show that they've spent, that they spent on advertising. It's not just that you give them the money. That money is actually having to be spent and justified as advertising outside the region.
Sure. I think it'd be an important exercise to just kind of churn those thoughts over, maybe get some input from council about above and beyond that 191, what can we expect? Because that's the other side of this coin. We have how much are we going to contribute to DMO, how much does the city need in reserves for other tourism expenditures. And I do have another question for you. Do you have, not right now obviously, because I don't think you came prepared, our cost to date of city expenditures for tourism related items, social media, website, labor, et cetera?
On your packet and in this section here, that's essentially what the tourism division has spent on those activities. That social media digital marketing line, there's more than one vendor in there, but just to condense it onto one page, I grouped that all into one group. So those are, as of last week, numbers.
Okay. Because we have these numbers from the DMO, since we weren't really able to get references from other communities, I think it would also be wise to see what those expenditures are referenced against the line items that they have here. That would give me a little bit better idea about how much these things cost, because I'm clearly not a tourism expert, so getting some sort of reference to the numbers that they've provided, I need something like that. Whether they do come from other cities, or if they come from our current expenditures, something that tells me that the numbers that we're working with here are accurate, or at least in that expectation ballpark.
I think I would strongly caution you against using these treading water numbers that the city has been paying over the last year, comparing that to what we might do in the future, because this is some pretty bare minimum stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. But what I'm asking for is a reference, something that I can use to educate myself, referencing the numbers that we've been provided today.
Questions, Brian?
So I'm going to, Mayor, if we could, before we move on, if that's a desire of all of council, I'm going to need to get further direction and clarity on exactly what you'd like us to report on, maybe at the next workshop on this item. I'm a little unclear as to what you're wanting us to compare from a cost perspective.
Well, I can help try to answer that, but of course you're asking for council direction. Website development is $40,000 even in the ballpark to fine-tune a website from what it currently is. Spring marketing campaign, $70,000. What's that going to get us? How much is typically spent on a spring campaign? I don't know the answer to that question. And so that could be $120,000 and I wouldn't know any different. So what I need is something that tells me what we can expect and what's being delivered, referenced against what are other communities spending, et cetera.
So I think what DJ is referencing is, like, on this colored Excel sheet, for our DMO, it's all broken down line by line, and for the other communities, we don't have the line by line breakdown, and I think that is kind of what you're looking for.
Sure. And that's where the start of the question was. Okay, the easiest one would be comparing maybe what did we spend on some advertising campaigns. That would get me closer to understanding these numbers. The spirit of this is to understand these numbers and to find out, are these good numbers? Not saying they're good or bad, but are these effective numbers? Are these numbers good enough? Are they too much? Are they ballooned expectations? That's what I need to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess what we could do is we could try to get a line item expenditures, say from 2019, of other groups. I'm not sure what it would tell us if we tried to get 2020 or 21 with the COVID issue, but maybe something before that hit, just seeing if we can get a line item budget of some of the other DMOs to compare. Is that sort of what you're looking for?
I'm sorry, I don't know a better way to describe what I'm looking for.
I think I know. And I have two thoughts. First, marketing is extremely subjective because you could pay $5 for a Facebook boost. You could pay $5,000. You'll get more marketing with $5,000, so you have to find that point of what you're looking for in terms of reach. But I think what you want maybe is rather than from city staff, maybe you want the DMO to provide a list of ideas or things about things that they might do with this money. Because something like printing, is $10,000 here. And if I were to create a magazine where I wanted 100,000 copies distributed all over the United States or something, that's going to cost a lot more than that, So it's like, what are they thinking they might get for $10,000? Is that kind of what you're...
Sure, yeah, it's fair to say that this question is for everybody in the room that might be able to provide that information, not just Adam or Doug or Terry or Aaron. It's for everybody for a better understanding, but yes, that is what I'm looking for. And also, the ultimate goal is they've asked for $700,000, and we need to figure out what do we need in reserves for tourism division expenditures, and how is a theoretical reduction of this $700,000 going to affect your anticipated budget? That is the ultimate goal of this exercise, is to find out how much can we afford to contribute to the DMO, how is a reduction going to affect these numbers, and how much money do we need in reserves for tourism division expenditures. And without a reference to understand these numbers further, I can't really step into that realm yet. I know what you're asking for, but I need to know more.
Yeah, I did speak with Doug a little bit about this, and I think I can help them work on that, because I think I've realized that some people on this dais don't know what does it cost for one billboard, right? You have no idea, right? You've never put up a billboard before, and how much does it cost to produce a flyer and hand it out, or that sort of thing? Is that what you're looking for, to get some ideas like that? Is that something we can work on? We have this come back up again next week, so we can, yep.
You might find some examples of that in some of the other information that we provided you from other cities, if you want to look at that too. But we can put something together. I just caution, again, of the accuracy, because, again, it's the cart in front of the horse type thing. But yeah, these are very expensive programs, and we have a pretty good idea of what they would bring, but it's not ultimately going to be our idea. So that's kind of where we're at.
Rob and then Rick.
Yeah, so earlier, this is kind of what I was asking for when we were talking about apples to apples, and I understand your caveat that different cities are different sizes, and this is just proposed, and we don't have our executive director yet, who's going to be the authority on that. I would also like to see, because it's very, I would hope relatively simple to do, but for the other cities, the termination notice, frequency of reviews, what is reviewed, and the percentage that they have for salaries. To me, that would also help me get a picture of where we stand, relative to the rest of the world. Anyway, anything that we could have to, and I also want to say that I'm very confident. Doug, you mentioned earlier about we don't want to get too stuck on what we're comfortable with in the past, and I would be very uncomfortable giving the past contractor even $500,000 because he wouldn't know what to do with the extra $200,000. I get a sense that you guys have a much more focused view of where the money has to go and the analytics involved to know how it's working out for you. And so I'm it's not a question of going back to what's comfortable. It's because you guys are giving us a much higher level of comfort than we've ever had before from the past contractor.
Rick?
I agree with Rob in saying it's hard to compare apples with apples, and I think it's part of the education for me was a litmus test and return on investment. And like it's been stated, if you're going to spend $1,000 on a certain magazine, and yet you have the reports that circulation of that magazine is really low, then I think we need to know that and to know why the changes are being made. And maybe, I think for us, we grew up with magazines, and for some of us that are older, we don't understand the internet. And yet if the internet's the one that's producing the return, we need to be informed of that. So I think when it comes to trying and say what we're getting for the dollar there, I think more of the education of what the media is being used and where it's being used. And I think we're going to have to look for the DMO more for those answers rather than for us trying to research city to city. Thank you.
Joel?
Just real briefly, and I think the conversation is probably appropriate, and then we probably need to move on from my perspective anyway, but it's exciting, it's an investment, it's opportunity, and we need to look at it through that lens, I think. It's not a cost, it's not an expense, and it's about the future of our city and where we want to go and what we want to be, and opportunities for our businesses and new businesses and our kids. So I'm excited.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I was just wanting to get a little bit more clarification on this number breakdown, because we have the costs, the $191,000 for internal costs and the Chamber of Commerce. And I'm just wondering, are those costs part of the LB capital section, or are those costs part of the council discretion section of that graph?
Council discretion section.
Okay, so if we have $191,000 currently needing to come out of that section, is that part of the $847,000?
That's correct.
So in theory, if we were to do the 35%, we would be $85,000 underwater from a city's perspective.
You would not be able to pay for those 4 items on the prior slide. That's correct.
Okay, so if we don't make any changes to those line items, the $847,000 is really more like $655,000. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Alrighty, we are going to be addressing the contract next week with regards to the DMO. And I will follow up with the DMO folks, because I think I have an idea here of what DJ needs and other counselors may need as far as marketing costs go.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Were we going to have discussion, or was that it?
Oh, I'm sorry, did you want further discussion on this?
I did. I thought we were just doing the question section
Oh,
still.
okay. Thanks, Adam. Okay, we'll open up. Did you have something? You have a question for Adam?
Or maybe it's for Aaron, I'm not sure. So in the cost implication, the $70,000 IT line, I'm just wondering, because the nonprofit has all kinds of mandatory reporting and transparency factors built into it, I'm just wondering if the IT costs are going to be as high to administer through a nonprofit as they would have been through doing it the city ourselves or doing it through a private sector person. Because one of the reasons that we've been sold on the nonprofit is that there's a lot of transparency built in, and it's easy for them to report to us. So I'm just wondering if that IT cost is going to be as high to administer through a nonprofit.
So the way that admin and IT cost works, every operating division in the general fund pays this, both this admin fee and the IT fee. That could be reconsidered, or one could be considered but not the other. That would just be shifting the burden of that $70,000 to other divisions. So it's not perfectly based on specific IT activity. That's just how those funds are funded citywide.
Rick?
So Adam, the other cities you've cited, do they have similar costs, and do they have 8%, or do they have a different value that reflects in their budget?
I've not cited, I haven't done research on other cities.
Okay. And
That's,
maybe the DMO would be able to answer that as well. I don't know. So on the IT costs of 8.8% in administration, is that a common line in a common percent that you observe in all cities, or do they have a lower or higher value?
I believe that would be in the ballpark. It might be, there might be some other things in there. But that should be around the ballpark, I would think. I'm not giving you an answer that I would hang my hat on necessarily either on that. So.
and hearing the question again, the admin and IT funds, that would just depend on how each city is structured. I've worked places where the administration fund is part of the general fund and it doesn't charge a fee, but it does take some of the general fund discretionary resources. So it's going to be different from city to city and how their admin fund is structured, what all divisions they have in there or don't have in there. So it's another apples to apples question, unfortunately.
Joel?
Oh, I just had a quick observation. You know, if you remove the Chamber of Commerce and you look at that as overhead, which is what it is, and overhead is taken from each department so that you don't have each department setting up an independent IT with fixed costs, and it's all in one place, so it's very much more efficient. And having that overhead rate of 12 to 13% or whatever that is, once you remove Chamber of Commerce of the total expenditures, in my experience, that's very reasonable.
And it's 8.8% is both of the rates combined.
Well, I was combining the personnel costs, property management, and IT costs all together, and looking at that as overhead.
All right, do we have other questions for Adam? No. Okay, we're going to move on to discussion. Brian?
Yeah, I have a couple things. The first one is that 8.8%, since we just did a increase in the lodging tax, it would, fair to assume that we might be able to reduce that percentage because we just had a pretty big increase in our revenue. So, I don't know what that would look like because, if we, Adam.
So this year, based on the recommended budget, which we haven't provided to you yet, I've got a reduction from, that's a combination of two, but admin is reducing from 6.8% to 6.5%, and IT is reducing from 2.4% to 2.3%. So that reflects that reduction in rate, which takes into account that additional revenue.
Great, thank you.
Just to add to that, the 8.8% is a much larger discussion than just travel and tourism. This is the way administration and IT is funded throughout the organization. So it's sort of like a franchise fee or something along those lines. If it's going to be 5% across the board for franchises, it needs to be 5% across the board to choose. Well, you're only going to have 3 and you're going to have 2.5 or whatever. So it's just because one budget goes up and one might go down, it's a bigger picture discussion than just here, because this is how IT and admin is funded.
Sure, and I didn't understand that this was standard across all departments. I thought it was specific to this discussion, so thank you for clarifying that. And so I don't know how much ability we're going to have to be able to reduce the 191,000. We might be able to reduce it a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, we really have $656,000 at our discretion, which would mean that even if we did 30%, that would leave $21,000 left over for events or tourism-related facilities, which is essentially nothing. So that $847,000 is not really what we have to work with. And the part of the conversation that we haven't talked about is we haven't talked at all about tourism-related facilities. And that is in my opinion, as important as tourism marketing. Because if we invest in tourism-related facilities to make the town better, it's only going to make people want to come here more and stay here longer. So, you know, they're two sides of the same coin. They both are investing in making tourism a success in Grants Pass. But I would hate to shortchange our ability to invest in tourism-related facilities and to give all of the money to marketing, and then we're kind of locked into one path without any wiggle room.
Other comments? Along those lines, one thing that we haven't finished addressing is the Welcome Center. So we have, you know, lined out as part of that $191,000 here includes the $78,000 that we've been giving to the Chamber of Commerce to manage the North Welcome Center, but we haven't ever addressed the Downtown Welcome Center and how it would be funded. Brian?
Does the Downtown Welcome Center funding come out of tourism, or does that come out of the general fund?
It was tourism, but it was the general fund flexible dollars of tourism. So,
Okay.
and if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's separate.
It was separate, but it doesn't, yeah, it could come out, it could be another, like the mayor said, could be another in addition to what you're talking about.
Sure.
Consider.
Yeah, and I think we discussed when Josie was here, I asked her if she had the ability to possibly run that center with volunteers, and I think that's a very worthwhile option that we should probably consider.
Rob?
The DMO Pros report, you know, does kind of specifically go into the value of downtown welcome centers, and they specifically talk about, when they say downtown welcome centers that are within walking distance of many of the attractions. And, you know, the study that the DMO Pros quoted was that downtown welcome centers, let's see, 35.6% of those who stopped into a downtown visitor center spent more money than originally anticipated. You know, and they've got a number of different metrics that they talk about, but they basically very clearly say that downtown welcome centers are much more valuable than welcome centers that are, say, on the freeway. They make that comparison as well. They break that all down. So it's really clear. I mean, DMO Pros says it, and I intuitively know it, that the downtown building is really important. Now, that we had originally had a figure on that of $65,000, and that was primarily, I guess, for salaries, I believe, to run it. How much Josie will be able to do that with volunteers, I guess we don't know yet. But clearly, that's a valuable piece here that we do need to consider.
Any other discussion on this for now? Nope. Okay, thank you. And we have already dealt with the wildfire protection plan, so we are up to agenda review today. Thank you, DMO folks. All right. Agenda review. So our next meeting is next Monday's workshop, and we have discussion coming up about tennis and pickleball MOU, the Destination Marketing Organization contract, and a code update regarding landscape and xeriscape development code update, rather. Any questions about any of that? Brian?
Yeah, I have a question about the tennis pickleball MOU, and this might be for Joel or Aaron. Did we get a motion from Parks Committee to approve that? Because I know that we've seen it before, maybe even a couple times, and so I'm wondering why we're having another workshop on it.
Go ahead.
The workshop was to have further discussion on specifically things like Reinhardt Volunteer Park and a couple of the other examples that we had that was outside the recommendations of the MOU between pickleball and tennis, and for council to consider some further potential modifications to the tennis courts for pickleball.
And the Parks Committee, when they were looking at it, there was a even break in what people wanted to do. And so what happened was the stakeholders got back together, I believe facilitated by Parks, to go over the different options, and they came up with some options for us to finalize and move ahead, because the Parks Committee really was evenly split, which is not a bad thing. It just reflects what happened.
Great, thank you.
And then also, starting next week, you'll be starting your budget committee meetings on Tuesday evening. So there's that to look forward to. Just a note, I would like to try to keep our other May agendas somewhat on the trim side, if at all possible. That will require your assistance by not loading us up with a lot of items during these agenda reviews. But if we have a lot of business to deal with, you will be very busy next month. That said, we do have a meeting next Wednesday as well. That's a 3-day marathon for you all. We're going to announce Tree City Year of the Tree, Oregon Tree City Year of, I cannot say it, City of the Year Award, and the Urban and Community Forestry Individual Award. We have a public hearing coming up on an ordinance regarding a property line vacation. We have a ordinance, council action to consider an ordinance on the wildfire hazard mitigation construction guide. Council action to consider a resolution replacing the water treatment plant site cleanup. Council action to consider a resolution on a system development charge grant for the steam distillery, as well as one for the Stepping Stone Preschool and Childcare. Another system development charge grant for Rogue Cleaners, and a relocation assistance grant to be considered for Rogue Cleaners. And then under the consent calendar, we have a resolution for the Beacon Drive water line, an amendment to council procedures, an amendment to committee procedures. Actually, I'm sorry, those have moved. Those aren't up next week on council procedures. Motion development code text amendment for certified local government findings of fact, and a motion to, on the comprehensive plan zone amendment for GP Downs finding of fact, as well as an appointment to the Bikeways Committee and consideration of removing a member from Committee on Public Art. That was due to low attendance. Questions about any of that? DJ?
You guys bringing us dinner?
Like I said, we're going to run it light through May. All right. Moving forward, we did have a request from Valerie, or via Valerie. There's a swim team that is having a difficult time finding a place to practice. They're wondering if we're interested in considering opening the pool by May 10th. So I was going to request maybe that we just have Parks look into that and let us know whether that's possible. And then council could consider at a future meeting the cost implication. So could you just do a memo for now, and then we'll add it to an agenda if it's necessary?
Sure, we can put a memo together, let you know the feasibility, and then the potential cost of opening May 10th or whatever.
May 10th is when they were planning to begin their practice season. Apparently they don't have a place to practice.
Adding to that, I don't know if you said that, but the request was just to allow for practice and meets, not like open to the general public, just if they could have a practice facility and area that they could have their meets for now.
And in that as well, I think it's usually, the pool is usually open at Grants Pass High School at the end of the year. I'm not sure if they're interested, but that's my understanding is that swimming class, PE classes typically use the pool at the beginning and end of the school year. So Not sure if that was already in the works or not. Anyway, I'm just requesting a memo on that for now. But does anybody have anything to add to the agenda? No, good. You guys are all in a lean and mean mood. Brian?
I don't have anything to add to the agenda, but I do have a question on I guess on the memos requested section, and this is for Aaron. Back in January, I believe, we had a discussion about getting our meetings live streamed on YouTube, and the last update was that was going to be happening in April, and it's getting close to the end of April, so I was just looking for another update.
Sure. Nothing's changed. They are scheduled to be in here at the end of April. It was a scheduling issue. This room is used all the time, and they need 2 days of uninterrupted opportunity to install the equipment necessary to do that. So that's happening at the end of this week. And after that, then we'll have the hardware and availability to stream live. And we'd probably want to do 1 or 2 dry runs before we go out and advertise that it is available to make sure we're doing it fine.
Great, thanks.
Anything else? All right. Well, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session for a special meeting. DJ?
I move that we adjourn into executive session.
Second?
Second.
Vanessa with the second. All in favor? Any opposed? All right.